My best friend kissed my wife on the dance floor, at our wedding reception, while I was giving my thank you speech at the microphone. I found out 3 weeks later. My parents told me to let it go. I didn't. I moved to Calgary, built a company from nothing. And 4 years later my father called me from a hospital bed asking me to come home, because the family I left behind had finally finished destroying itself. I am writing this from a condo I own, in Calgary. Sec floor. View of the Bow River. I bought it 14 months ago with money I earned with my own hands and my own decisions. Nobody helped me get here. Nobody called to check on me while I was building it. My name is Joel. I am 34 years old. My wife's name was Sabrina. We were married on August 3rd, 4 years ago, at a vineyard outside Niagara on the lake. My best friend's name was Colin. Let me go back to that night. Colin and I had been friends since we were 11 years old. 23 years. We grew up on the same street in Oakville. He was the best man at my wedding. He spent 9 minutes giving a toast at the rehearsal dinner. He said I was the most loyal person he had ever known. He said Sabrina was lucky. He cried a little, actually. Real tears, or what I thought were real tears. He hugged me outside the restaurant after. Said, "Tomorrow's going to be perfect, man. I'm so proud of you." The next evening I stood at the microphone in front of 220 people, and thanked every person who mattered to me. I thanked Sabrina's parents. I thanked my parents. I thanked Colin. I said he was more than a best friend. I said he was a brother. While I was saying that, he was on the dance floor with my wife. I didn't see it happen. My cousin Faye saw it. She didn't tell me that night. She didn't want to ruin the reception. She waited 3 weeks. Until the honeymoon was done. And Sabrina and I were back in our townhouse in Burlington. Until she thought enough time had passed, maybe. She could tell me without it feeling like a bomb. There is no amount of time that makes that kind of news land gently. Faye called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work. She said, "I need to tell you something and I need you to sit down." I sat down in my car in the parking garage. She told me what she saw. Colin and Sabrina on the dance floor, slow song, his hand on her lower back, her face turned up toward his, and they kissed. Not a quick accidental thing, a real kiss. Long enough that Faye stood there for a moment, thinking she was misreading it before she realized she wasn't. I sat in that parking garage for 40 minutes. Then I drove home. Sabrina was in the kitchen. I walked in, put my keys on the counter and said, "Were you and Colin together at any point before we got married?" She stopped what she was doing. She didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything before she said a single word. She said, "It was nothing. It was one time. It was before we got engaged. One time. Before the engagement." As if a timeline makes it smaller. I said, "Did you sleep with him?" She said, "Joel, please don't do this." I said, "Did you sleep with him?" She said, "Yes." I asked her when. She said, 8 months before I proposed. We had been together for 2 years at that point. I had been saving for the ring for 4 months already at that point. I didn't tell her that part. I just stood in the kitchen and let the math arrange itself in my head. I asked her if Colin knew I was going to propose. She said he did. So he knew. He knew I was going to propose. He knew what we were. He slept with her anyway. Then he stood at the rehearsal dinner 9 months after that, and cried real tears about loyalty. I called Colin that night. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Sabrina told me." He went quiet. Then he started talking. He said it was a mistake. He said it only happened once. He said he had carried the guilt for over a year. He said he thought about telling me but he didn't want to hurt me. He said he loved me like a brother and that was exactly why he could not to say the words. I said, "You stood at my rehearsal dinner and talked about loyalty for 9 minutes. He said, "I know." I said, "You gave a toast at my wedding." He said, "I know, I'm sorry. I am so sorry, man." I hung up. I called my parents that night. My mother picked up. I told her what happened. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Oh, Joel." She said it the way you say something when you don't know what else to say. Then she said, "Are you sure? Is it possible Sabrina misread what happened?" "Maybe it didn't mean anything," I said. "She told me herself." She confirmed it. My mother said, "Oh, okay. But you have to think about this carefully. You just got married. You have a home together. You have a life together. One mistake a year before the wedding doesn't have to mean everything falls apart. One mistake. My wife slept with my best friend 8 months before I proposed, and my mother's first response was to tell me not to throw away the life I had just built. My father got on the phone. He said, "Son, I know this is hard. But Colin is family to us. You've known him since you were 11. You don't walk away from 23 years over one bad decision." I said, "He knew I was going to propose and he slept with her anyway." My father said, "People make mistakes." I said goodnight and hung up. I slept in the guest room. The next 2 weeks I went through the motions. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner. I did not sleep in our bedroom. Sabrina kept trying to talk. I kept not having anything to say. Colin texted me every few days. I didn't respond to any of them. My mother called twice. I picked up once. She said Colin had called her. She said he was devastated. She said he wanted a chance to explain in person. I said there was nothing to explain that. I didn't already understand. What I understood was this. Two people who were supposed to be the closest people in my life had made a decision together to keep a secret from. They had sat at my rehearsal dinner. They had stood at my wedding. They had toasted me and danced with me and hugged me, and they both knew. They both knew the whole time. 3 weeks after Faye's phone call, I called a lawyer. Not for the marriage, not yet, just to understand what I was looking at. Her name was Veronica Chu, Family Law Toronto. She walked me through the basics. The townhouse was in both our names. We had a joint account with about $42,000 in it. My car was mine. Her car was in both names. We had been married 8 weeks. We had no children. Veronica said, "This is early enough that separation is relatively clean if you want it to be." I said, "What do I do first?" She said, "If you're serious about this, take your half of the joint account today." I transferred $21,000 to my personal account that afternoon. I left her half exactly where it was. I did not tell Sabrina what I had done. I went back to my office and sat at my desk and stared at a wall for about 20 minutes. Then I pulled up job listings. I had been a structural estimator for a mid-size construction firm in Mississauga for 6 years. Good position, good salary, $92,000 a year plus benefits. I had been there long enough that I could leave on my own terms with a solid reference. That Thursday, I gave my notice. My manager, Whitfield, asked if it was personal or professional. I said personal. He said he was sorry to hear it and handed me a reference letter that same day without being asked. That letter is still in my files. I told Sabrina I was leaving on a Sunday. Not leaving her, specifically, though that was coming. Leaving Ontario. I had nothing in Calgary except a city that didn't know my name. That was enough, she cried. She said she loved me. She said she was sorry. She said she wanted to try. I said trying wasn't the problem. The problem was I would spend the rest of my marriage wondering what else I didn't know. She said that's not fair. I said no, it isn't. I signed the separation agreement 6 weeks later. Veronica handled it. The townhouse sold 8 months after that. After the mortgage and fees, we each cleared about $38,000. I had already been gone for 5 of those months by the time the check arrived. I drove to Calgary in November. Took me 2.5 days. Stopped in Winnipeg overnight. Got into the city on a Thursday afternoon. Checked into a motel off Deerfoot Trail. $68 a night. I had my car, my laptop, my tools, my documents, and about $40,000 between savings and the account transfer. I got a job within 2 weeks. Estimating work for a mid-size firm called Redwood Builds. Starting at $26 an hour, down from what I had been making. I took it without negotiating, because I needed to start somewhere, and standing still cost more than moving cheap. My parents called in December. My mother said they missed me. She said Colin had come over for dinner. She said it without thinking, or maybe she thought I wouldn't react. I said, "You had Colin for dinner." She said, "He's been struggling." I said, "So have I." No one came over for dinner. She started to say something about how this was hard on everyone. I told her I had to go and hung up. I changed my number 2 weeks after that. New Alberta number. I gave it to 4 people. My cousin Faye, Veronica the lawyer, Whitfield for references, and the woman who owned the house I was renting a basement suite from. 4 people. That was my entire world in Calgary that winter. But here's what winter in Calgary does if you let it. It forces you inside, into your own head, into the work. I started taking on freelance estimating in the evenings. Small residential contractors who needed accurate numbers and couldn't afford a full-time estimator on staff. I charged $45 an hour to start. Within 3 months I had more freelance work than I had hours. I turned down the overflow. Then I raised my rate to $65. The work didn't slow down. My cousin Faye was the one who kept me updated on home. Not because I asked her to. Because Faye has never once in her life held back information she thought you needed to have. She texted, not called. Text felt safer, less like the past reaching through the phone. Month 4 in Calgary, Faye texted. Colin and Sabrina are together. They announced it to a group of people at someone's birthday. Your parents were there apparently. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and went for a run. It was minus 14 degrees. I ran for 45 minutes. Month 7, Sabrina is pregnant. Colin announced it at a get-together. Your mom and dad were there. I don't know how to say this without just saying it. Your mom seemed happy. Month 7 and my parents were attending announcements about a pregnancy between my ex-wife and my former best friend. I thought about calling them. I thought about it for about 4 days. Then I didn't. Month 10, Colin lost his job. Something about missing targets. I don't have the details. He's freelancing but it's not going well. I heard from someone that Sabrina isn't happy. Year 1. Redwood Builds offered me a senior estimator role. I took it. $94,000 base, plus performance bonuses. I also kept 2 freelance clients. The ones I liked working with. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in Kensington. $1,200 a month. Small but it was mine and mine alone. Year 2, I started my own firm. Just me to start. Hollis Estimating Solutions. I registered it in Alberta, set up a business account, started taking on more clients. By month 4 of operating it, I was grossing more than my salary at Redwood. I gave Whitfield a call to tell him. He said, "I'm not even surprised. You always had it in you." While I was filing my first HST return, Faye texted that Colin and Sabrina had broken up. 6 months after the baby was born, Faye said Sabrina had moved back in with her parents in Niagara Falls. The baby's name was Ethan. Wait. No, that's not what I need to sit with. What I need to sit with is that she left him. The woman who had an affair with him, who married me while keeping that secret, who then got together with him after I left, also left him. Because the version of someone that you see in a secret is not the version you have to live with every day. Year 3. My firm had 4 clients and 2 subcontractors I was using regularly. Revenue that year, $410,000. I moved into a larger space, proper office, not just my kitchen table. I met a woman named Petra at a Habitat for Humanity volunteer build in the spring. She was a civil engineer. She showed up with her own work gloves. We talked for 3 hours on the drive back from the site. She said, "What do you do?" I said, "I estimate." She said, "Estimate what?" I said, "What it costs to build something." She said, "And are you any good at it?" I said, "I've never been wrong in a way that mattered." She laughed. It was the right kind of laugh. So we started seeing each other in May. She knew the outline of what happened. I told her on our 3rd date. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "That is a lot to carry across the country. Saidless every year." She said, "You didn't hit anyone." I said, "No." She said, "That tells me something about who you are." I said, "It tells you something about how badly I wanted to get out of that city." She's been in my life for 18 months now. She is steady and direct, and she does not tell me what I want to hear. Those are not small things. Year 4. My firm crossed $800,000 in revenue. I had 3 employees. I bought the condo in December. Put $80,000 down, 15-year mortgage, payment around $2,040 a month at current rates. It is mine, my name on the title, no one else's. Faye texted in the fall of year 4. She said, "Your dad is sick. Heart stuff. Nothing immediately critical, but they're monitoring it. Your mom is stressed." Also, Colin's back in the picture apparently. He's been helping with the baby. He and Sabrina figured out some kind of arrangement. He's still struggling financially from what I hear. My father was 69. He had worked as a pipe fitter for 30 years, retired at 62. He had a pension, but it wasn't substantial. My mother taught elementary school, still worked part-time as a supply teacher. They had the house in Oakville, which was worth something, and retirement savings, which had been quietly diminishing since my father's health started declining 2 years earlier. I did not call after Faye's text. I thought about it. I went to bed thinking about it. I woke up still thinking about it. 3 weeks later, my mother found my number. I don't know how. Maybe Faye slipped. Maybe she called enough of the right people eventually. She called on a Wednesday morning, while I was in a site meeting. I saw the number and stepped out of the room. I answered because I wanted to hear what 4 years of consequences sounded like coming out of her mouth. She said, "Joel, please don't hang up." I said, "I'm listening." She said, "Your father's health is getting worse. The doctors are talking about a procedure. He's scared. And we're struggling. We've had some expenses and it's been hard to keep up." I said, "What kind of expenses?" She paused. Then she said, "We've been helping Colin. He's had a rough couple of years. The job loss, and then trying to be present for the baby, and he didn't have anyone else." I said, "He had anyone else?" She said, "We've known him since he was a child." I said, "So have I. I was him since he was a child. I was the one who brought him into this family. And then he slept with my wife, stood at my wedding knowing what he had done. And 4 years later you've been supporting him financially while I built a company alone in Calgary without a single phone call." She went quiet. I said, "How much?" She said, "What?" I said, "How much have you given him?" Another pause. She said, "Over the last 3 years, maybe 35, 40,000. Small amounts here and there, helping with rent when Sabrina left. The baby's things, a few things for his place. $35 to $40,000. To Colin. While my father's retirement account was being watched, and a procedure was being discussed, and my mother was supply teaching in her late 60s, to make ends meet." I said, "Mom, you gave Colin $40,000. She said, "He needed it." I said, "I needed something too 4 years ago. I needed my parents to pick up the phone and call me. Not to host Colin for dinner. Not to fund his apartment while he raised a baby he made with my wife. I needed someone to call and ask how I was doing in a city where I didn't know anyone." She started crying. Real crying, not performance. "I know the difference," she said. "I know. We were wrong. I know we were wrong. We treated Colin like he was the one who was hurt. And you disappeared and we didn't know how to reach you and we kept going. We kept things going the way they were." I said, "You kept things going with the person who betrayed me. That is a choice. You made it every month for 4 years." She said, "Your father wants to talk to you." My father got on. His voice was different. Thinner. He said, "Son."
Just that word?
Just my name and a word, and I had not heard his voice in 4 years. He said, I owe you an apology, a real one. We should have chosen you. That first night you called us, we should have gotten in the car and driven to Burlington. And been there. We didn't. We stayed home and we managed things from a distance. And we let Colin stay in our lives, because it was easier than sitting with what he did. That was wrong. I'm saying it now because I don't know how many chances I'm going to get to say it. I didn't speak for a long time, he said. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I know I don't have the right to ask that, I just wanted to hear your voice, I said. How serious is the procedure? He said they're not sure yet. Could be a stent, could be more. We'll know in a few weeks. I said okay. He said okay what? I said okay, I heard you. He said will you call again? I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. I said, I don't know Dad, I honestly don't know yet. He said that's fair. We hung up. I went back into my site meeting. I sat at the table and looked at the drawings in front of me, and did not take in a single line for about 10 minutes. Something settled. Not peace exactly, but the kind of quiet that comes after you say out loud something you have been carrying for a long time. I called Faye that evening. She picked up on the first ring. I said, how bad is Dad actually? She said, I don't know all the details. But your mom looks tired, Joel. Like more than tired. Like she's been holding things together with both hands for a long time, and she's starting to drop things. I said. She gave Colin $40,000 over 4 years. Faye went quiet. Then she said, I didn't know the number. I said, neither did I until today. Faye said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out the difference between what I owe them and what I choose to give them. She said, that's a hard line to find. I said, yeah. We talked for another hour, not about what to do, just about what things were. Sometimes that is enough. 3 weeks after that call, I booked a flight to Toronto. Not because I forgave everything. Not because $40,000 to Colin vanished, or the 4 years of silence reversed them. On the phone. Erased what my parents chose when it mattered. I booked it because my father was 69. And his heart was being discussed in clinical terms 34. And I was 34, and I had spent 4 years building something I was proud of. And somewhere in the construction of that life I had decided that not going up and back was the point. But the point of leaving was never to disappear. The point was to become someone who could choose. I could choose to go. That was different from being summoned. I did not call Colin. I did not plan to see him. I did not owe him a conversation, or a confrontation or a moment of any kind. Whatever he had built, with the wreckage of what I left behind. That was between him and the decisions he made. I landed in Toronto on a Tuesday morning. My mother picked me up at the airport. She looked smaller than I remembered. The way people look when 4 years have moved through them. She didn't say anything when she saw me. She just put her arms around me in the arrivals hall and held on for a long time. I let her. We drove to the hospital. My father was sitting up in the bed when we walked in. He looked at me for a moment like he was checking whether I was real. He said, you came? I said, yeah. He said, how's Calgary? I said, cold, profitable. Good. He almost smiled. Then he said, tell me about the company. So I did. I sat in that hospital chair and told him about Hollis Estimating Solutions. And the 4 employees in the condo, and the Bow River view. And Petra with her own work gloves, showing up to a volunteer build. He listened the whole time. He asked questions. Real ones, about the work, about how I'd built the client base, about Alberta's construction market. He had been a tradesman for 30 years. He understood the language. When I finished he said, you built that alone? I said yes. He said, I'm proud of you. I know that doesn't fix what we did. But I want you to know that. I said, I know Dad. The procedure was scheduled for the following Friday. A stent, as it turned out. Routine enough, the cardiologist said. Though no one uses the word routine in a room where your father is the patient. I stayed for 10 days. I slept in my old bedroom. My mother made breakfast every morning. We did not talk about Colin. We did not talk about Sabrina. We talked about other things and let the other things sit where they were. The night before I flew back to Calgary, my mother sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands around a mug of tea and said, is there any way back for us, for real? I said, I don't know what that looks like yet. I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need to figure out what I'm actually willing to carry and what I'm not. And I need you to understand that Colin is not part of any version of things where I'm present. Not at Christmas. Not at dinner. Not in any room I'm in. That's not negotiable. She nodded slowly. She said, okay. I said, I'm not asking you to cut him off. I'm telling you the terms. She said, okay. I said, I'll call more. I can't promise what that looks like yet, but I'll call. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. I let her. On the flight back I sat in the window seat and watched Ontario disappear under the clouds. Somewhere over northern Ontario I thought about night. I drove Burlington from in the airport and walked into the kitchen and asked Sabrina one question that changed the rest of my life. I thought about parking garages and Tuesday afternoons and the 45-minute run in -14. I thought about Petra's laugh and Faye's texts and Whitfield handing me a reference letter without being asked. I thought about the condo, and the Bow River, and the company I built with my own estimates and my own rate card. And my own 4 employees who show up every Monday morning. None of that came from staying. All of it came from leaving, and then building something that was only mine. I got back to Calgary on a Thursday. Petra was at the condo when I arrived. She had made dinner, she did not ask a lot of questions. She just handed me a plate and sat across from me and let me eat. After a while she said, "How was it?" I said, "Hard, okay, I'm glad I went." She said, "Did it fix anything?" I said, "No. But I think it started something." "I don't know what yet." She said, "Sometimes that's enough." I looked at her across the table in the condo I own in a city I chose. With the river outside, a company with my name on it. And a woman who shows up with her own work gloves and does not tell me what I want to hear. I thought about the man who stood at a microphone, at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake and thanked everyone in the room, including the one person who had betrayed him. Including the wife, who had let that secret live between them for 8 months. That man left Ontario with $40,000 and a car full of the things that mattered and no clear destination except away. He is still in me somewhere. He got me here, but he is not who I am anymore. I have never been more certain of that than I am right now.